Hello everybody, welcome back to another video by Jay Bowman. And today I'm talking again about one of my favourite synthesizers. So this is the Mask1 by Kodamo. And I've changed the camera view slightly for this video. Rather than trying to include the keyboard and everything else, I'm just focusing very tightly on the user interface. So you can see here these buttons, these two encoders, and I have the oscilloscope here as well. Because what I want to talk about today is the user interface of the Mask1 specifically, and the synth engine as well, and how they interact. And in some of the early reviews, and possibly even in some of the marketing for this synthesizer, it was described as a kind of Zen synthesizer. And so I wanted to just talk through this morning some of the ways in which that seems to me to be accurate. And then in the second part of the video, I'm going to explore or break down a patch which to me is an illustration of the way in which the Zen philosophy of this instrument arises in sound design, or the results of using the user interface and the synth engine in that way create a sound which, in my opinion, would be unusual or difficult to create on a different synthesizer with a different engine. So that's what this video is going to be about. I don't really have a detailed structure other than that basic two-part idea. So what prompted the idea for this was I have a couple of synths actually which have multiple different waveforms. So one is the Waldorf Kyra and the other is this Mask1. When I say waveforms, in the Mask1 they're called bit masks. So in the Mask1 you have 512 different bit masks. Yet again, I will just do a quick demonstration so it's not too much for me talking, so you can hear what I'm talking about. So I've gone into oscillator 1, I've chosen mask, which is the first setting, and I'm just going to hold down a key and I will use the encoder, the value encoder, to scroll through the bit masks so you can hear what I'm talking about. So I've gone all the way to 512 or 511, which is the top mask, and I'll go back to 7, which is the sawtooth. So we are on familiar ground. So that is that's at the heart of the Mask1. Now in terms of the Kyra, I mean, my intention in this video wasn't really to talk about the Kyra, but it's on my mind slightly because I've got it packed up ready to sell just now. The Kyra has thousands of waveforms, but you can't do what I just did there, which is scroll through them very quickly because it doesn't have a value encoder. And the waveforms are separated out into different folders. So even if you could scroll through them, you would have to keep coming in and out of folders. So that's a very different approach. But the reason I brought up the Kyra in the first place was because what both the Kyra and the Mask1 seem to share in common is that there's no easy way to crossfade between one bit mask and another. So what I mean by that is, if you're using a traditional wavetable synthesizer, then obviously the way the wavetable is set up, there might be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, however many kind of waveforms there are in the table. And obviously you have a kind of smooth crossfade between those waves, generally for modern wavetable synthesizers, as you modulate between them through the table. Whereas in the Kyra, there's no way to do that. And in the Mask1, there isn't really a way to do that either. So as you'll have seen from me turning the encoder, those are discrete bit masks that you're hearing there. There's no crossfading between them. Now, if we modulate the bit mask position using the LFO, so again, I'm going to try not to explain too much what I'm doing, but if you can see on the interface, hopefully you can see how I'm getting around the synth and changing the parameters. So I've gone into LFO1, I'm going to change the parameter that I'm modulating to the mask. I'll use a lower speed, let's go to 5, and I'll change the amount. So now you can hear how the LFO affects the mask position. So there you can hear, even though the change is relatively quick, you are still getting discrete waveforms or discrete bit masks. There can be some kind of least significant bits that you hear between the masks, but it's not a smooth transition. And even if you increase the speed up into audio rates, which you can do on the LFO, that sound is flicking between discrete masks rather than a smooth interpolation. So clearly there's no way, and the delta envelopes, which I've explored on previous videos within the masks, they do something similar. Let me show that again. So I've gone into oscillator 1 menu. Let's go to the start point. Let's just go 5 up. We'll choose a speed like 5 for the delta envelope. And let's go looping envelope. So again, looking at the oscilloscope and hearing, you can hear again that we're just going through discrete bit masks there. If I slow it down a lot further, then you might see some of the intermediate stages. So let me change the start point so we're only going 1 up. So in theory, there should just be 1 bit mask and then another. But we're going to hear some of the intermediate stages there for the least significant bits. Let me reduce the speed further. Hopefully you can hear, it's quite subtle, but there are a few stages that it's going through before you reach the next bit mask. So we're going down from 8 to 7 there. Let's try going down from 32 to 31, which is a sine wave. That might be more obvious. Yeah, so there you can hear the least significant bits. So there are some intermediate stages. So obviously 31 is the sine wave. Those buzzy noises that you're hearing on the top are 32 and a couple of stages between it and 31. But that's not a smooth transition. So using the delta envelopes, using the LFO, there isn't really a way to transition between 2 bit masks in a way that you might use a wavetable synthesizer. And so sometimes that is the sound that you want. You think, okay, well, I've got a bit mask here on oscillator 1, for example, that is the sawtooth. Let me turn oscillator 1 down, go to oscillator 2, and I will use a different bit mask, one of my favorites. Let's go to 15, which is half sine. So I've got 2 separate envelopes, 2 separate oscillators with 2 different bit masks. It would be nice to be able to smoothly transition between the 2 of them. So you might think there might be an option in the LFO to do that. Well, indeed, you have 2 LFOs here, and although balance between oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 isn't a target for modulation, you can change the volume of oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 independently. However, because there's no phase setting for the LFOs, they are in sync generally. So that won't work. Let me just try that as a practical demonstration. So if I set up LFO1 is modulating, that's going to drive me crazy. I will go to LFO1 and have that modulating volume for oscillator 1. I will go to LFO2 and have that modulating volume for oscillator 2. I'll match the settings so we've got the same speed and same amount. And I might need to turn up the So you see the problem immediately because there's no phase control for each of the LFOs. They're fading in and out at the same time. So having said that, that's not quite true because for some reason at the moment, if you look at the lights on the LFO, you can see they are out of phase. And that is because I've changed the rates of the LFOs at different times. So because I've done that, they've gone out of sync. But the issue you then have is if you save this as a patch and then you come back into the patch, the LFOs will have locked sync again. So to show that, I can just push the compare button, I think, which goes back to the patch as it was originally saved, i.e. an init patch. Then push compare again. So there you can see that the LFOs have locked in sync, which is their default behavior. So to smoothly crossfade between the oscillators, you can do it by luck, as I just did then, where because of the way I changed the rate independently of the LFOs, they ended up slightly out of phase. But that's not going to work for a patch that you save, and it's very difficult to get it how you'd want it, so that the volume of one waveform's at its maximum, the other's at its minimum, and vice versa. Okay, so the LFOs are not going to work as presently set up with their current parameters. However, the Mask1 does have independent looping envelopes for each of the oscillators. So my thought then was, okay, I can't use the LFOs at the moment to do that. Maybe I can use the looping envelopes. Now, each parameter in the envelope, so these are ADSR envelopes. So you have a value from 0 to 15. So let's say I want to set it up so oscillator 1 has the long attack, and we'll leave the decay at 6, a sustain at 0, and actually 15's going to be a bit too long. Let's try 10 and 6. And now let's try the other way around. So we'll try 10 for the decay for oscillator 2 and 6 for the attack. Let's hear how that sounds. Oh, the first thing I need to do actually is then just turn looping on. So that's not worked. Let's see. So I'll try and fine tune that. So let's use a longer attack. Let's go up to 12 and reduce that to 5. And then we'll go 12 for the decay in oscillator 2 and reduce the attack to 5. Okay, well let's try 0 for the attack there and 0 for the decay there. again, it's an interesting effect, but it's not quite what I'm going for. Let me try, if I increase the attack further, let's go up to 14. And so I will increase the decay to 14. Let's see. So I'm kind of getting there, actually. One of the issues you have is that the different masks are at different they have a different amplitude, as well as sometimes a different pitch. So maybe if I increase the level of oscillator 2, which is the half sine, and I'll also increase the pitch so they're playing at the same pitch, because mask 15 half sine plays at an octave below mask 7, so I needed to correct that. So let's okay, let's speed it up. So I'll go 10, 10. So you can come up with an interesting effect, but it's not going to replicate the wavetable smooth shifting between the two of them. Ironically, it is actually easier to do that on the Kyra, because that has a phase setting for the LFOs. So we run up against the limitations of the Mask1 interface. I mean, it does, in some ways, it's very flexible, because it has these separate ADSR envelopes for each of the oscillators, the noise and the filter, 2 LFOs with a large number of destinations, and the LFOs have settings like delay and decay. So in some ways, it's very flexible, but in other ways, you keep coming up to this fundamental character of the synth, which is, I think it's been described as a very carefully curated set of parameters which are deliberately designed for getting good results, which I say is very accurate. But as soon as you try to operate beyond those parameters or push the boundaries, you do start to run into limits. So that is where you really need to adopt a kind of Zen mindset and really work with the interface. So I went through that exercise the other night of trying to get the bit masks to crossfade into each other, and eventually I gave up and said, okay, well, I'm not getting anywhere with this, but let's see what is coming out of the synth. And at that point, I came up with the basis of a sound which I think is, as I say, very interesting, and which could only really have come from this synth. So let's hear that. So I've saved a couple of different versions. So this is the first one that I came up with. So obviously I was tweaking, and I thought, okay, that sounds interesting. That sounds like the basis of a patch. So I saved it. And then I developed it further in the next patch up, which I saved, so 115. So to me, that's an interesting sound. And what I want to do now is just break down the patch. So looking at the front panel, obviously there are no knobs. So I think anyone who's really into knobs on synths, probably you're not watching by this point in the video, but obviously what you can see is just rows of buttons, 2 encoders. So, and this 7-segment display, which is just showing the patch name. So you can't look at the front panel and think, oh, I know what's going on. But to put the other point of view, for synths with knobs, most of them, you can't look at the front panel and know what's going on anyway, because the front panel doesn't reflect the patch underneath it. So I'd say that this interface is no more or less confusing than a traditional knob per function synth. We are getting some visual feedback, so we can see that LFO1 is operating at a very fast rate. You can see the flickering light there, hopefully. In fact, looking at my camera, I think because of the frame rate, it's not picking up just how quickly this light is flashing in real life, but looking at it with my naked eye, I can see that that is operating at audio rate, LFO1. And LFO2 is fading smoothly in and out, so you can see that's a sine wave doing something. So we already have some visual feedback, some accurate visual feedback from the front panel. We know that LFO1 and LFO2 are doing something. So what else is going on? How can we tell? So we have the envelope light lit up here on this button. It's essentially a shift button. So if I go into oscillator 1, I can see that oscillator 1 has a level of 20. So there is sound being generated through oscillator 1. Oscillator 2, same thing, level 20. Noise level 3, so that's having an effect as well. Filter envelope 63. So you can see from this patch that all 3 noise sources and the filter, there's something going on just from looking at those 4 buttons. And obviously I'm going through this very slowly to try and illustrate my thought process, but once you get used to this synth, you do really fly around and muscle memory, etc. kicks in. So let's have a look at the LFOs first of all to try and work out what on earth is going on with this sound. So LFO1, the amount is 1, so it's a very low amount. Speed is 16, so that's the top speed. Destination is oscillator 1 mask, and it's a sine wave, although you couldn't tell that from looking at it because it's flashing so quickly. Let's turn up the amount and see if that gives us a clue as to what's going on. So this LFO is generating that glitchy sound, but you're not hearing that glitchy sound all the time. Hopefully you can hear that it plays or doesn't play, not dependent on key press. So something's going on, more than one parameter is interacting there. Which means that that glitchy sound generated by LFO1 is only happening sometimes. So as I say, that's modulating mask 1 position. What's LFO2 doing? LFO2 is also modulating mask 1 position. It's doing it very slowly at the minimum speed, speed 1, and using a sine wave. And the amount is 7. Let's turn up the speed of LFO2 to see what effect that has. So the two LFOs are doing essentially the same, they're modulating the same thing, but they're doing so in different ways. So LFO1 is modulating the mask position very quickly, but a little amount. LFO2 is modulating it a lot more, but slowly. So let's go into oscillator 1 and see what's happening there. So let's look at the envelope first of all. And in fact, to do that, let's turn off oscillator 2 and the noise. And I'll just turn off the filter. So that is just the sound of oscillator 1 on its own. So the bass mask is 31, which is the sine wave, which you can see there. We have a slow attack of 10, a slow decay, 12, no sustain, and a longish release of 10. So the LFO is obviously modulating the mask position to produce some of that effect. Is there anything else going on? We can see that I've raised the semitones, or the pitch, or the octave of oscillator 1 to -5. So it's essentially a fifth above standard pitch for what what you'd expect, say, an 8-foot pipe on an organ to be playing. That doesn't really matter in isolation unless you've got perfect pitch. So let's move on from that. So we can see that the delta envelope, the delta mask envelope in oscillator 1 has a start position of -3, a speed of 3, and it's looping. So we have oscillator 1 mask position being modulated by LFO1, LFO2, and oscillator 1 itself. And so -3 means it's going down into the masks which run up to mask 31, which are an interesting blend of square and sine, or triangle and sine. So 31 is a pretty pure sine wave, but the masks going up to that have an interesting kind of metallic quality to them by combining sine with these other shapes. So that's what we're hearing there. So let's turn off the LFOs altogether. So you can hear that's what the mask envelope the delta mask envelope is doing. It's just going round and round in a cycle. It's going down to mask 28 and coming back up to mask 31. So that is most of the, I'd say that's probably most of the interesting part of the patch. But obviously it's not oscillator one's not playing in isolation. So let's have a look. At what else is going on. So I will turn down everything else and we'll just look at oscillator 2. So oscillator 2, level 20. So that's just the bare sine wave. There's no attack, it's a very fast attack. And you can kind of hear the click at the start when I press key on. So it's a very fast attack for the sine wave. It's full sustain and a longish release. And by itself it's quite a nice sound. Let's have a look. So this is playing at standard pitch. So the default pitch that you start on for the Mask1 is -24, which you might view as 2 octaves below 0. But for the sawtooth wave, which is Mask7, -24 plays at standard pitch. -12 would be an octave above, but the sine wave actually plays 2 octaves. Well, Mask31 plays 2 octaves below standard pitch, so we're playing an octave above that. Again, unless you've got perfect pitch, none of this matters. The reason it does matter is because oscillator 2 is playing there, say an octave below standard pitch, and oscillator 1 is playing a fifth above that. That gives the patch some of its character. If I turn oscillator 1, reduce its pitch so it's playing at the same pitch as oscillator 2. That changes the character. I mean, again, it's still an interesting patch, but I think pitching it up to a fifth gives the patch a slightly more odd or eerie character. Especially when that glitch comes in. Okay, so we've looked at oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. The noise was on level 3. Let's look at the envelope. So it's a longish attack, a short decay, a little bit of release, and it's not looping. So if I turn up the level of the noise, you can hear more obviously what it's doing there. So I think when I started designing this patch, if you look at the basis that the first save point that I made, I obviously thought, oh, that's interesting, that kind of audio rate modulation of the mask. What if we try and mess with that to make it so that it's not a constant? So here, when I developed it, we get to this more kind of random effect because of the way the LFOs and the bitmask delta envelope are interacting. That is giving it the more glitchy and eerie feel to it. Obviously the noise there there wasn't any noise on the original patch, so I think what happened is I came up with the basic structure with the oscillators and possibly the filter as well, and then I thought, okay, well, we've still got the noise to play with. Can that do anything interesting? And it's reasonably subtle. You have some flexibility with the noise, so you've got this frequency setting, which I've shown before, but let's play with that again, because that's something I remember having to decide, where do I set the frequency of the noise? So I've turned the volume up, so you can hear the maximum frequency of the noise is 127. So I've come down a bit from 127 to 120. That's 127. So obviously I felt that it was too prominent at that level. And reducing the frequency gives it a very different character. So I played around with different levels, different frequency levels for the noise, and eventually I settled on 120, which just by coming down from 127 to 120, just pulls it back a bit in the sound. And obviously I've reduced the level, so it's only at level 3, so it's quite subtle in the background there. And let's look at the filter and see what that's doing. So we're working with sine waves here, so normally the filter wouldn't have a huge impact. So we're in low pass mode, as you'd expect. Tracking's at 50%, and we're in 24 dB per octave mode. But the filter envelope is taking it out of, because the level of the envelope is so high, it's probably taking it above the maximum cutoff frequency. So what's happening there? It's not looping, so it's got zero attack, so it's going up above the maximum cutoff frequency and then coming down quite slowly because it's got a decay of 10. Let's reduce the decay and see what happens then. Yeah, so you can hear. Okay. So it's working mostly on the noise because, as I say, the sine waves aren't going to be that affected by the filter. It's just calming down and clipping the tail of the noise with the frequency. So if I reduce it to 7, you hear the it's more obvious at 9, so the decay is just coming down and so at 10 it's quite subtle. It'll be more obvious as well if I reduce the level of the filter envelope so it's not going up above the cutoff frequency so high. Let's reduce it to 10, see what that sounds like. that is reducing not only the noise, but obviously some of the glitch effect, because even though the sine wave itself is poking through the filter is catching the glitch as the mask goes down into the lower, more triangle or square-like masks. The filter is having an effect on that. So as I increase the filter envelope level, you can hear what's going on there. So that's the filter. There's obviously some effects going on here as well. So let's see what's going on in the effects. So effects 1 is the bit crusher. Now it's at level 0. So if I just play a key normally, you're not hearing the bit crusher. But I know that I've mapped aftertouch. So if I go into the mod setting, go to aftertouch destination, FX1 balance, and it's at the maximum amount. So let's hear that. So by using the aftertouch, I can bring that effect in. So that bit crusher. So different bit crusher settings. Let's go through them now. I'll just turn the balance up so you can hear it. So that's number 1. So back to number 1. Actually, this is quite a difficult sound to demonstrate it with because the sound has so many random elements. The bit crusher is going to grab those elements and affect them differently each time. So you're not going to get a consistent result, but so what you'll notice from that is bit crusher's settings 1 to 8 are just set at a set rate, whereas once you get into bit crusher 9 and the higher settings, higher numbers, so 9 to 16, there is an LFO being applied to the bit crusher setting itself. So that's just adding an extra layer of movement to the patch. I mean, that really does go to the core of the Mask1's ethos, which is that you have this small set of carefully curated parameters which are musical. At the moment, there's no way to match the frequency of these bit crusher LFOs to internal clock or to MIDI. And there's no control over the parameters other than changing between the 16 different options that you have. But you can find, generally you can find from those options a sound that will work well for what you have in mind. So that's the case here. So that's FX1, bit crusher 9. So we also have FX2 at level 25, so that's having an effect. So that's delay 11. Let's turn the effect level up so we can hear more, obviously, what effect that's having. So at 100, it's completely wet. Let's change the type. So delay 1 is one I use a lot because it's very obvious when it's turned up to 100, so it's 100% wet, but if you use it at lower settings, it's just a very nice kind of basic delay with reverb added in, which works well for quite a wide range of sounds. So that's delay 1. I'll put it at 50%. So this is delay 2. So as you get up to the higher numbers of delay, you get to shorter delay times and more like a slap back and then into kind of almost comb filter territory, which in itself is interesting. So we've looked at the sound sources, we've looked at the filter, we've looked at the LFOs, we've looked at the effects. Let's go into the mod section. So we've already established that aftertouch is routed to the level of FX1. So velocity is routed to the effect of the filter envelope generator, but only at a relatively low rate, at low amount. So in theory, the harder I hit the key, the more effect the filter envelope will have on the filter. If I turn it up to 15, or rather I should have said more accurately, the more effect velocity will have on the filter envelope. So I play softly, you can hear the filter cutoff is a lot lower. If I play hard, then you can hear that the filter envelope is having its effect, so it's pushing the cutoff up. So the mod wheel is routed to LFO2 amount. So let's hear the mod wheel in action. So that's another interesting setting. For the mod wheel, you do have the option to directly modulate mask position, for example. which is in itself is an interesting effect, but I'm not using it there to do that. I'm using it to increase the effect that LFO2 is having on the sound overall. And is there anything else going on? So I've just got standard poly play mode. In previous videos, I've looked at some of the other play modes, but I'm not going to go over those now. Standard volume. I haven't affected the overall pitch of the patch, which you can do in the general settings. I've not changed the pans setting, which gives you the ability to have different voices play left and right. Which you could do, as I've done there. And I've not changed the rate setting, which this is an interesting setting because that affects the rate at which the envelopes, the looping envelopes, play based on where in the keyboard you play. So if I turn it up to maximum, I'll play a high note. You hear the envelopes going very quickly. If I play a low note, the envelope's going very slowly. If I turn the rate down to 0, then the rates are consistent across the keyboard. Again, if I turn it up to maximum, you can hear how the rate changes across the keyboard. Okay, so hopefully that's been an interesting look at the Zen nature of this keyboard. And the way the user interface works and the way that it gives you opportunities, but it also kind of steers you into a certain method of patching, certain nooks and crannies which it invites you into. Very different from a knob per function synth in the way that it makes you think while you're using it. You have a lot of parameters mentally in your head. In some ways, people would say that's harder than a knob per function synth, but in a knob per function synth, if you're patching, you always have to bear in mind that the knobs, the sliders, the faders are not, they're lying to you essentially. They're telling you information which is false. So, you know, both approaches have their attractions. I really like the user interface of this synth and the way that it makes me think while I'm patching. It's not for everyone, and I think there are always we have this carefully curated set of parameters, but as a user of the synth, as a player, you always want more. And so there are suggestions that I've made, for example, for being able to change the phase of the LFOs, or to have the balance between oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 as a destination of the LFOs. So I've made proposals like that. What I wouldn't want to do is detract from the Zen nature of the synth. So these are just me as a user, as an owner of the synth, trying to see how far we can push it. But it is a really fascinating and inspiring instrument to play and to design sounds on. So I think that's as much as I'm going to say in this video. If you've made it through to this point, thank you very much. It's turned out a lot longer than I expected. And please do give me a like and a subscribe, and I will catch you on the next video. Thank you very much, and bye for now.